Normally on my channel, I talk a lot about classical music, but sometimes I want to talk about other genres as well. So in today's video, I'm going to talk a little bit more into the folk music side of music, and start with a song that a lot of people know, and you will definitely know if you've ever been in a choir at any point and you are located within North America, basically. And that is the song Shenandoah. Shenandoah, Shenandoah. I've heard it both ways, I've sung it both ways, and for the purpose of this video, I'm going to pronounce it Shenandoah. It's a beautiful song. It's typically played much slower and as like a sort of ballad and lyrical. Those are the two words I was trying to go for. A ballad and a lyrical piece. It's overall very, very beautiful. And the lyrics, while vague, do talk about a lot of things that are within mostly America, but for the purposes of this video, I will say that this is a generically North American song because there are some references to Canada as well as America in the background and history of the song, I should say. But what exactly does this song mean? I mean, if you've sung it before, you probably know the lyrics, but it's a little bit difficult to try to fully interpret what's going on in this piece. So I guess by accident I'm sort of doing a what the heck are they singing kind of video, but instead of translating it, we're just going to go through the background and look at the lyrics and understand just the background of this song in general. So let's start with the history. So obviously it's a folk song. So unlike a lot of other genres of music, folk songs, we really don't know the actual true origin of this song. Sometimes these kind of songs just come about and then are passed down from person to person to person to person, and sometimes generation to generation. So with folk songs, we're really not going to know the full background of the piece, but with this one, historians generally agree that it probably came from French-Canadian voyagers who were traveling through the rivers and Great Lakes system. So during the late 18th century into the early 19th century, there was a large fur trading business going on within this border, where it's essentially the border between what is now America and Canada. And a lot of people came into this area to trap a lot of the local wildlife to then sell for its fur pelts to be made into a variety of other things. This was the biggest business that was really going on in this area, and a lot of people came in and did this job because there was a lot of resources here. And so it's speculated by a lot of historians that this song originated from the French-Canadian trappers that were in this area during this time and was used as sort of like a work song. In other words, a sea shanty. Uh-oh, somebody alert sea shanty TikTok. And in fact, this is corroborated by a lot of other sources. For example, the first print edition of the Shenandoah was in an 1882 edition of Harper's Bazaar under an article titled Sailor Songs. So trappers would come through this area, travel through canoes and in the water, and would be using sea shanties like this song to be a part of their to help them work. If you're familiar with how sea shanties work at all, it's usually a call and response kind of format, and it's usually someone calling out to workers and they all do it together at one rhythm to kind of keep the working rhythm going and keep it all coordinated. So with that in mind, let's look into the lyrics to understand how not only that fits, but also what the lyrics themselves are kind of trying to say. So let's start off with the first verse, which is the most well-known. Now, I'm going to give a little mini disclaimer here. I'm going to go with a variation of the lyrics. There are lots and lots and lots and lots of variations of these actual lyrics, as is the case with most folk songs. You're not really going to see it the same way twice. If you've sung this in a choir at all, you'll know that one arrangement and another arrangement probably do not have the same set of lyrics. And this is true with every single version that I tried to look up and corroborate across the board with each other. I never came across the same set of lyrics twice. Some of them were very similar. Some of them did have the same sets of verses, but some would have more verses, some would have less, some would have a slight variations in the lyrics. So I'm going to go through a few of them. I'm going to go through probably 3 verses if I remember to read the third one. And I'll try to point out a couple of spots where I know that it does change and vary a little bit. So the first set of lyrics is, "O Shenandoah, I long to see you, away you rolling river. O Shenandoah, I long to hear you, way we're bound away across the wide Missouri." So this whole thing, you can kind of see this like call and response format, especially since the lines like "away you rolling river" and "way we're bound away across the wide Missouri" are repeated in every single stanza of this song. That gives us an indication that that's going to be the chorus set of this call and response, and the part that changes is going to be the part that the leader would sing in this kind of worker and leader dynamic and singing as being a part of a working song. One quick little note here in the line "away you rolling river," I've also heard this as "and here your rolling river." That does change the context a little bit, because if we're looking into understanding what these lyrics are trying to say, that gives us 2 different meanings as to what might be being talked about here. So we're saying, "Oh Shenandoah, I long to hear you." So somebody's longing for Shenandoah. Now, the most common interpretation of this that most people I think would automatically jump to is the Shenandoah River Valley, either Shenandoah River or Shenandoah River Valley, that's located within northwestern Virginia. And interestingly enough, that second line already changes the meaning for which thing we're talking about. So if we go with "away you rolling river," then it sounds like we're talking about the actual Shenandoah River. If we're talking about "and here your rolling river," then it more so sounds like we're talking about the Shenandoah River Valley. So we've already got a little bit of confusion as to what these lyrics mean. However, this already gets way more jumbled up when we go into the next verse. So the second verse that I have here goes as follows. "O Shenandoah, I love your daughter. Away you rolling river. O Shenandoah, I love your daughter. Way we're bound away across the wide Missouri." Okay, so here's where it gets really a little bit confusing. So we said, "I long to hear you," Shenandoah. We think, okay, maybe it's a river, maybe it's a valley. They long for this location. This is probably their home, right? So then why would we be talking about Shenandoah's daughter? I mean, maybe we could be referencing a river like the offshoots, like the little tributaries? Tributaries? Is that the word for it? I can't remember. But anyways, the little, the offshoots that a river tends to have. Maybe we're referring to that as Shenandoah's daughter, but that seems really unlikely and honestly a bit of a stretch. I've never really heard of the offshoots of a river being called daughters before. So let's take a different look at this song instead. Does the name Shenandoah actually come from anything? Because obviously if we have a Shenandoah River, if we have a Shenandoah Valley, that's probably named after something else, right? Well, I don't know if it is directly related to the actual Shenandoah Valley, but Shenandoah is a name. And Shenandoah, or Scanandoah as he's also sometimes called, was an Oneida chief, which the Oneida tribe was part of a larger coalition of tribes, also known as the Iroquois. So in a context like this, "O Shenandoah, I love your daughter," this starts to make a little bit more sense. If we understand the song to have origins of the French-Canadian trapper routes of the Great Lakes, where were the Oneida people? Well, the Oneida people were along the Great Lakes, along with many of the other associated Iroquois tribes. And in fact, the Oneida people have 4 main locations that are still around today. 1 in upstate New York, 2 in Ontario, Canada, and 1 around Green Bay in Wisconsin. And this makes a lot more sense than talking about Shenandoah River or Shenandoah Valley, which, like I said before, are located in northwestern Virginia, which is very far away from the Great Lakes that the French-Canadian voyagers and trappers would have been traveling along, and where the Oneida people are actually located. So the idea of Shenandoah being a person and potentially being associated with this Shenandoah, the chief, this Native American chief, makes a lot more sense than it being located in Virginia, right? So maybe Shenandoah isn't the river after all. So why the lyrics "away you rolling river" or "away your rolling river"? Well, this could possibly be more associated with the fact that it's a sea shanty, you know? So you have this call and response format. And while we would call it a sea shanty, that doesn't necessarily mean that in this context it's actually used on the ocean. It's more so just the genre of music rather than being actually associated with the sea. More likely, these French-Canadian voyagers would be traveling down rivers in canoes, where you still do have to paddle and you have to keep up with everybody else. Finally, what about the Missouri part? What does Missouri have to do with any of this? And I'll be honest, I didn't find any actual real answers that talked about why Missouri was mentioned. Because even when thinking about both interpretations, either we're talking about Shenandoah the area or Shenandoah the person, the why Missouri doesn't seem to be really related to either of those. Because, I mean, you have the state of Missouri in the middle of America, but you also have the Missouri River, which runs through the Midwest up into I'm gonna put a map on the screen. It runs up north, I believe, up into like Montana kind of area, and out west. And this wasn't really part of the areas that the trappers were often in. However, the beginning parts of the Missouri River were still considered to be part of French territory during this time. So it's possible that sometimes people would be traveling along the Missouri River as well as other rivers. However, that might still be a bit of a stretch, seeing how far apart the Great Lakes and the Missouri River still are from one another. Regardless, this song just seems to have confusing lyrics no matter which way you slice it. So I'll leave that one more up to your own personal interpretation. So that's really all I had for this week's video. If you like this content and you'd like to see more of it, feel free to subscribe to the channel. I upload mostly every week, and I talk about all things music. So if you enjoy that, please feel free to subscribe. And otherwise, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.